Just as Luciano whispered goodbye to the world, the ground trembled with the thunder of engines. Then silence, as a billionaire CEO stepped into the storm and spoke his name. Not as a stranger, not as a savior, but as someone who owed him a debt from a past he didn't remember. What had he done that could make a woman like that ride through fire to find him? Welcome back to my channel, where we share emotional and interesting stories. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe so you can get more of these stories. Your support means the world. The wind screamed across the mountains like something alive. It clawed at every crack in the cabin walls, rattling old window panes and smothering the night in a wild white silence. Snow fell so thick it erased the world beyond the porch. Each flake seemed to whisper an unwelcome truth. No one is coming. Inside the cabin, the fire guttered low. Barely a flame now, more memory than heat. Luciano Pedro, former Marine, former engineer, former everything, knelt beside the hearth and fed it the last sliver of firewood. The ember caught weakly. It wouldn't last. On the couch, 4-year-old Sophia lay curled beneath a blanket, too thin for a night this brutal. She held her teddy bear tight against her chest, the way some children hold hope. Her breaths were soft, steady, unaware of the cold tightening its grip on their home. Luciano stood and crossed the room, lifting the edge of the blanket to tuck it around her shoulders. Her tiny fingers reached out in sleep, clutching his shirt. He paused, his hardened exterior cracking for a moment as he brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. He used to be a builder of dreams, a master motorcycle engineer whose work was admired across states. His custom engines won competitions, investors lined up. He had a wife who believed in him, a future unfolding in steel and speed. Now he had one log of wood, a broken roof, and a daughter who believed he could still fix everything. His gaze drifted to the frosted window. Nothing but darkness. Nothing but snow. "This is the last night," he whispered to himself. He didn't know if he meant the last log, the last storm, or the end of the life he once knew. The wind shifted. Something changed. Luciano frowned, stepping closer to the window. At first he thought it was a trick of the storm, white moving against white. But then he saw it. A glow. A light stabbing through the snow. Then another. Then 20. Headlights. Engines roared through the blizzard, low and thunderous, vibrating through the earth. Luciano's heartbeat quickened. These weren't cars. The formation was too tight, too controlled. They cut a path up the mountain road with impossible precision. Their lights shone like a procession of ghostly lanterns, illuminating swirling snow in golden halos. Luciano moved with silent instinct. He covered Sophia with a second blanket and stepped out onto the porch, pulling his jacket close. Snow bit into his skin, sharp and immediate. The bikes came to a synchronized halt. 20 riders, all women, their silhouettes powerful against the storm. The lead rider dismounted. She removed her helmet. Leon Cortez, black hair swept with frost, jaw set with purpose. Eyes like someone who didn't just survive storms. She commanded them. She stepped forward, boots crunching in the snow, and met Luciano's gaze without hesitation. Her voice carried through the wind, not loud, but impossible to ignore. "We need shelter. Please." Luciano stared. Her riders stood behind her, shivering from the cold, yet holding ranks like soldiers of a forgotten order. Sophia stirred inside, a faint whimper escaping the cracks of the cabin. Luciano's hand tightened on the doorframe. He had enough fire to last an hour, enough food for one small girl, enough pain to justify closing the door and pretending he saw nothing. But the storm pressed on, wild and relentless. And 20 strangers waited silently for his answer. Would he lock the door in fear, or open it and let destiny in? For one long breath, the silence between them was louder than the storm. Luciano didn't speak. He didn't nod. He simply stepped back from the doorway, one arm braced against the threshold, making space. Leon Cortez gave a single, short command to her riders. Inside, quickly. Like disciplined soldiers, the women dismounted in unison and filed into the cabin. Snow clung to their jackets and hair, melting instantly in the rising warmth. Boots thudded softly against the wood floor. Not one of them spoke above a hush, as if they understood this was not their territory, but a sanctuary they had been permitted to enter. Luciano shut the door behind them. The storm's roar muted. What was once an echo chamber of cold and emptiness now held the weight of presence, human, real, alive. One rider, a tall woman with silver streaks in her braid, pulled out a thermos and unscrewed the top. Rich steam filled the air. Coffee. Real coffee. Another unpacked a container of stew from her saddlebag, the kind that carried the memory of fire and spice. The cabin, moments ago a tomb, was awakening. A soft sound came from the couch. Sophia stirred, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her gaze drifted across rows of leather jackets and shining helmets, eyes widening, not in fear, but awe. Leon approached her slowly, removing one glove. "Hi, Princessa," she said gently. "Are you cold?" Sophia blinked, then reached out small arms without hesitation. Leon lifted her as if she had always known how to hold a child, with care, not pity. Luciano watched, frozen. Sophia rested her head on Leon's shoulder, tiny fingers clutching the lapel of her jacket. Leon sat near the fire, holding her close to the flickering warmth. "She's freezing," Leon murmured softly. "When did you last add fuel?" Luciano hesitated. Admitting the truth felt like laying his shame bare. "That was the last log," he said quietly. Two riders rose instantly. One brought in firewood from their supply. Another tossed a thick wool blanket over the back of the couch. Within minutes, flames roared back to life, casting gold light across the cabin walls. The Iron Valkyries exchanged stories as they warmed their hands. Not idle chatter, but gritty tales of road rescues, charity rides, veterans they'd helped, systems they'd fought. Their laughter was unguarded. Their voices carried a strength forged in storms harsher than this one. Leon studied Luciano over Sophia's sleeping form. His posture hadn't changed, shoulders squared, feet evenly planted, eyes always moving, not in panic, but in silent assessment. "You served," she said, her tone light, but unquestionable. Luciano stiffened. There was no point denying it. "Marine Corps." A few riders nodded, a silent salute. Leon's gaze lingered. "Honorable discharge?" Luciano's jaw flexed. "Medical." Then, his eyes shifted to the floor. Life happened. Leon didn't push. She simply adjusted Sophia in her lap and added quietly, "Marines don't run from storms. So what storm made you disappear?" Luciano didn't answer. The fire crackled. The storm pounded. For the first time in years, Luciano was surrounded by people who didn't look away from brokenness, and didn't worship it either. Sophia stirred again and whispered without opening her eyes, "Daddy, they stayed." Leon looked at Luciano over Sophia's head. Her next words landed like a match on dry timber. "Why did a man like you disappear from the world?" Luciano didn't answer right away. The room seemed to hold its breath with him. The storm outside battered the walls, yet inside, all he could hear was the echo of Leon's question. "Why did a man like you disappear from the world?" He didn't owe them his story. These were strangers, famous ones, powerful ones. They could leave in the morning and never look back. But Sophia, sleeping now in Leon's arms, finally warm, finally safe, made the decision for him. He spoke without looking at anyone. "I used to build things," he said quietly. "Engines. Machines that answered to thunder. I started a small shop, Pedro Customs. We took metal and made it fly." In his mind, The cabin walls melted away. 6 years ago, Luciano stood in a sunlit garage, grease on his fingers, joy in his veins. Journalists snapped photos as he unveiled the Pegasus 1, a motorcycle that broke a land speed record and rewrote engineering manuals. Investors lined up. Orders poured in from across the country. And at the center of it all, his wife, Elena, her smile brighter than any chrome, her hand always folded with his at each new milestone. They were building a legacy. Until the diagnosis: leukemia. Her battle was swift, brutal, merciless. Hospital rooms replaced racetracks. Medical bills skyrocketed, draining their savings, then their business accounts. Luciano sold prototypes, equipment, even their home. But nothing bought time. Elena's final words were a whisper in his ear. "Promise me you won't let her grow up in the spotlight. Let her be free. Let her be normal." She died in his arms, with Sophia's tiny hand between theirs. The fire popped. Luciano, out of his thoughts. He swallowed hard and continued. "I lost my wife in October. By December, I'd lost the company. My business partner, someone I trusted like a brother, took investor money, filed fraudulent claims, and pinned the collapse on me." He looked up now, eyes steady but hollow. "They called me unstable, said I couldn't run a company while raising a child alone. They painted me as a liability, a grieving Marine on the edge." "What happened to the partner?" one writer asked. Luciano shook his head. "He sold the company to a venture firm before the lawsuits even hit. He walked away a millionaire. The media loved the story. American hero turns dangerous recluse. They printed lies, parked cameras outside the house, tried to photograph Sophia at her mother's funeral." The anger in his voice wasn't loud. It was quiet, sharpened by memory. "So I vanished," he said. "I paid what I owed. Then I walked away from everything." Leon hadn't moved a muscle. Her expression wasn't pity, it was calculation, recognition. "You didn't disappear," she said finally. "You were erased." Luciano's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying?" Leon slowly stood, gently passing Sophia into the arms of a nearby rider. She stepped toward Luciano, her gaze never leaving his. "I know who you are, Luciano Pedro," she said softly. "I know what you built, and I know that what happened to you wasn't failure." She paused. "It was theft." Luciano blinked, stunned. Leon's next words landed like a strike of lightning. "And I've been searching for you." The silence that followed Leon's words was heavier than the storm outside. Luciano stared at her, at the unwavering conviction in her eyes, trying to make sense of what she had just said. "You were searching for me?" he asked, voice low. Leon nodded once. "Not for who you've become, for who you are." Before he could respond, a sharp knock came from the back of the cabin. One of the riders had opened the side door that led toward the old shed, Luciano's abandoned workshop. "Leon," the rider called. "You'll want to see this." Leon didn't wait for permission. She stepped outside, boots sinking slightly in the snow, and made her way toward the structure, half buried beneath frost and years of silence. Luciano hesitated, then followed. The door groaned as Leon pushed it open. What little light existed spilled into a graveyard of forgotten brilliance. Dusty blueprints curled on a workbench, edges browned by time. The skeletal frame of a half-built motorcycle sat in the center of the room, its chrome dulled, but its lines unmistakable, beauty, even in ruin. On the far wall, faded stencils bore a name almost erased by weather: Pedro Customs. Leon moved slowly, like she was in the presence of sacred ruins. Her fingers traced a line on the blueprint. "This is your Pegasus prototype," she said, recognizing the signature design. "Version 7, the one you never released." Luciano said nothing. The air smelled of old oil and memory. Leon turned to face him fully. "You built machines that didn't just move," she said. "They gave people purpose. Freedom. You didn't create bikes, Luciano. You created second chances." He exhaled sharply, pain and anger flickering in his eyes. That was another life. It doesn't have to be. Leon took a folded packet from inside her jacket and placed it on the workbench. Inside were legal documents with an embossed seal bearing her company's name, Cortez Velocity Industries, one of the most powerful motorcycle corporations in the world. "I want you to partner with me," she said. "Not as an employee, as a founder. We're launching a nationwide veteran restoration initiative, workshops where Marines like you can rebuild their lives while rebuilding bikes. Hope on wheels, purpose in motion." Luciano took a step back as if the offer itself was a threat. "No," he said immediately. "I'm done with investors, alliances, promises. Everything I built was taken from me. I won't give the world another piece of my soul just for it to be sold again." Leon didn't flinch. "This isn't charity," she said. "This is legacy." Luciano's jaw tightened. "Legacy doesn't put food on the table." Leon's expression softened, just slightly. "It puts fire back in your heart." For a long moment, the workshop held only their breathing and the low hum of the storm. Then Luciano shook his head. "Find someone else. Someone who still wants to be saved." Leon studied him for a heartbeat, then closed the folder with quiet respect. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. Instead, she walked to the door, hand resting on the rusted frame. "Some of us don't run from fire, Luciano," she said softly, eyes fierce in the fading light. "We ride through it." With that, she stepped back into the storm, the iron Valkyries following her one by one, engines roaring back to life. Luciano stood alone in the workshop, the echo of thunder fading into silence. Back inside the cabin, Sophia blinked sleepily as the sound of engines vanished into the night. She looked up at her father. "Daddy, why did you say no to the lady who wanted to help?" Luciano couldn't answer. A week passed. The storm had spent itself, leaving behind a bruised sky and snowbanks shrinking in the weak Tennessee sun. The cabin, once battered by wind, now sat beneath a deceptive stillness. But inside, the silence was worse. There were no more riders, no more laughter. Just the echo of an opportunity Luciano had turned away. He split fallen branches from the forest for firewood, each swing of the axe met with the same thought. "You said no to the only lifeline you've had in years." Sophia played quietly on the rug, making pretend motorcycles out of scraps of wood. "This one is Miss Leon," she would say, "and this one is Daddy riding beside her." Every time he heard it, something inside him twisted. Then, on the seventh day, the stillness shattered. Thunder. Not from the clouds, from engines. Luciano stepped onto the porch, heartbeat stuttering. Across the valley, glints of sunlight bounced off metal. Engines roared in synchronized unity as 20 motorcycles surged up the road, followed this time not just by riders, but by 3 colossal semi-trucks, each bearing the logo, Cortez Velocity Industries. Snow sprayed in glittering arcs as the convoy arrived in formation. The first bike braked to a perfect stop in front of the cabin. Leon Cortez swung off it, helmet tucked under her arm, eyes locked on Luciano like she never left. But this time, she wasn't asking. She was delivering. Her riders dismounted and immediately began opening the trucks. Hydraulic lifts descended. Machinery gleamed. Restoration tools, welding stations, chrome frames, diagnostic computers, the kind of equipment even Luciano had never been able to afford in his company's prime. "What are you doing?" he demanded, stepping forward. Leon met him halfway, calm as ever. "Fulfilling destiny," she said. One of the riders unrolled a banner across the workshop wall as the others cleared space. Cortez Pedro Veteran Restoration Initiative. Hope in motion. Purpose in steel. Leon handed him a sealed envelope. Luciano hesitated. Hands that once signed million-dollar contracts now trembled as he broke the seal. Inside, legal documents. Partnership papers. Not employee agreements. Not charity grants. Co-founder rights. Leadership authority. Percentage ownership. Sophia ran out of the cabin, eyes lighting up as she saw the machines being unloaded. "Daddy, they came back!" Luciano looked at Leon. "Why are you doing this?" Her answer was simple. Because when the world left you with nothing, you still chose kindness. You opened your door, even when your fire was dying. She stepped closer. "I don't invest in companies, Luciano. I invest in people who remember humanity when humanity forgets them." He opened his mouth to protest, but she lifted a hand, silencing him. "This isn't charity," Leon said, voice firm. "This is rebirth." The Iron Valkyries began assembling the first workbench in perfect silence, like a ritual of resurrection. The cold mountain air stilled. For the first time in years, Luciano Pedro had no argument left. He stood motionless, the documents in his hand trembling, not from fear this time, but from something more dangerous. Hope. If this moment moved you, if you believe second chances don't always knock, sometimes they roar. Comment, like, and share. Tell us in the comments. Do you believe destiny can find you, even when you've given up on finding it? The first rays of morning touched the mountains, glinting off polished steel where rust once ruled. The abandoned workshop that had been left for dead was now alive with motion, sound, and purpose. It had become more than a garage. It was rebirth in metal and fire. A forge, not just for bikes, but for broken lives. Machines hummed, sparks flew from welding torches, and for the first time in years, laughter echoed in the air. Veterans from across the state, some in wheelchairs, some with scars visible and invisible, arrived one by one. Their eyes held the same haunted look Luciano saw in his own reflection. They came not just to build, they came to heal. Luciano stood before them, hands in his pockets, uncertain. But as he watched one veteran run a hand over the engine block of a bike as if it were a heartbeat, something stirred in him. Leadership wasn't something you lost. It was something you either ran from or stepped back into. "All right," Luciano said, his voice firm but warm. "Let's build something worth living for." Each day, the shop evolved. One corner became a counseling area with coffee and chairs. Another, a training station where veterans learned fabrication, earning real wages and real pride. Sophia ran through the aisles wearing a pink helmet, giggling as she waved at the veterans. "Morning, heroes!" she shouted every day without fail. Men who once forgot how to smile found themselves grinning when she ran past. One veteran with trembling hands steadied himself while teaching her to tighten a bolt. "She gives them purpose," Leon said softly, leaning beside Luciano as they watched. Luciano glanced at her. "She gives me purpose." Leon's eyes met his, steady, unreadable, but not cold. Day by day, Luciano felt something awakening in him, a rhythm he had almost forgotten. Teaching others wasn't a burden. It was breathing again. Purpose was welded back into his bones with every spark, every turned wrench, every story shared over coffee with men who once stood where he stood. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the skylight, a veteran named Harris stood before the group. "My wife left when I came back from overseas," Harris said quietly. "Said she didn't recognize me anymore. For a long time, neither did I." He placed his hand on the frame of a bike he'd spent the week rebuilding. "This." His voice cracked. "This made me feel human again." Around him, heads nodded. No applause. Just understanding. Sophia ran forward and hugged his leg. "You're not broken," she said simply. You're fixing things again." Luciano felt his throat tighten. Leon watched him from the other side of the shop, eyes softer than he had ever seen. No praise, no pity, recognition. That evening, after the shop emptied, Luciano stepped outside to find Leon sitting under the stars beside the bikes. "This isn't just a business to you," he said. "No," Leon replied. "It's a battlefield. And you, Luciano, whether you accept it or not, were born to lead soldiers." "Not soldiers," he corrected softly. "Survivors." Leon looked at him, her voice just above a whisper. "That's what makes you different." Their eyes held, not in romance, but in something far deeper. Trust. Destiny. Fire recognizing fire. A sleek black car pulled up to the edge of the lot. Luciano stiffened. From the vehicle stepped the man who destroyed everything. His former business partner. The betrayer. The thief. He smiled like a viper. "I heard you've resurrected something," he said smoothly. "And I've come to buy it, or bury it." Luciano's hands clenched. The war he thought he left behind had just found its way to his door. The moment Luciano's former partner, Vincent Mallory, stepped onto the property, the air changed. Not colder, sharper, like steel before a strike. Vincent walked through the workshop as if he owned it, tracing his fingers along the polished frame of the motorcycle Harris had just restored. "Impressive," he murmured. "Too impressive, actually, for something you claim is non-profit." Luciano's jaw tightened. "State your business and leave." Vincent smirked. "Oh, I am. Consider this a courtesy visit." He turned, eyes gleaming with malice. "You rebuilt your name on land you don't legally own. The Restoration Center? It's now in direct violation of zoning and licensing codes." Luciano stared at him. "You filed claims." "Filed?" Vincent chuckled. "My lawyers filed. My shareholders backed it. My media team is already working. By morning, every news channel will know that unstable war veteran Luciano Pedro is running an illegal operation, endangering the public and his own daughter." A ripple of silence tore through the shop. Sophia, playing near a tool bench, looked up just as Vincent turned to leave. "Better start packing," Vincent said over his shoulder, "before Child Services pays you a visit." By sunrise, headlines flooded the internet. Bankrupt veteran goes rogue. Ex-Marine runs unlicensed bike cult. Child living in danger? Investigation begins. Photographers appeared along the road leading to the cabin. Drones buzzed overhead. Journalists shouted questions through megaphones. "Luciano, are you mentally stable? Is your daughter safe in your care? Did you steal intellectual property from your former investors?" Luciano shut the door and pulled the curtains tight, his hands shaking. He had survived war, bankruptcy, grief. But this was different. Now they were coming after Sophia. In the workshop, the veterans gathered in uneasy silence. Harris slammed his fist on the table. "They can't do this! This place saved us!" "They can," Luciano said, voice low. "And they will. If shutting this down means keeping Sophia safe, then we stop." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Across the room, Sophia walked to him, clutching her teddy. "Daddy," she said softly, "are they coming to take me away?" Luciano's breath caught. He knelt, pulling her close. "No one is taking you anywhere." But as he held her, fear wrapped around him like a vice. For years, he'd built walls to protect his daughter from the world. Now that world was pounding at the gates. He stood, ready to make the only decision that made sense to a father. Then Leon Cortez stepped forward. "You walk away now," she said. Voice steady but edged with fire. "You teach your daughter to flee when lies are louder than truth." Luciano met her gaze, torn. Leon placed a folder on the table. "Vincent Mallory's entire operation is built on fraud. I've been tracking him since he stole your company. I have files, emails, transaction records, sworn statements from his investors. He's not coming after you because you're a threat. He's coming because you're the only one who can expose him." Luciano stared, stunned. "I didn't come here to rescue you, Luciano," Leon continued. "I came to fight beside you. You are not alone anymore." Sophia slipped her small hand into Luciano's. "Daddy," she whispered, "let's stay and fight." Outside, the sound of engines filled the air, not from the Iron Valkyries, but from government vehicles pulling onto the property. Reporters swarmed the gate as a sheriff's car and 2 black sedans arrived. Leon turned toward the door. "It's time," she said. "The court hearing is today." Luciano took a breath, holding Sophia close, not as a broken man, but as a soldier returning to battle. The fight for everything was about to begin. The courthouse steps were already swarmed by reporters when Luciano arrived with Leon and Sophia at his side. The winter wind whipped through banners and camera flags, but another sound rose above the chaos. Engines. Not 1, not 20, hundreds. From every direction, motorcycles appeared, filling streets, sidewalks, and even hillsides. Veterans in worn leather jackets. Single mothers who had found work in the restoration shop. Former inmates given a second chance. Young men who had once been homeless, now proudly riding restored bikes built by their own hands. Every one of them came not as spectators, but as living proof. Banners unfurled over the crowd. "We are Pedro's proof. Hope rides on 2 wheels. Veterans for Luciano." As Luciano stepped out of the car, a thunderous chant rose. "Let him build! Let him build! Let him build!" Sophia, sitting on his hip, lit up with wonder. "Daddy, they're all here for you?" He swallowed tightly. "No, baby. They're here with us." Inside the courtroom, the judge tried to call order, but the roar of motorcycles outside echoed through the very walls. Vincent Mallory smirked from across the room, flanked by his lawyers. But then, before the proceedings began, the doors opened once more. Leon Cortez stepped forward, not as a spectator, but as a witness. She placed a stack of documents on the judge's bench. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady, "before accusations are heard, the court deserves to see evidence. Emails, bank transfers, hidden accounts, signed statements, physical proof that Vincent had stolen intellectual property, declared false bankruptcy, and laundered funds through shell companies overseas." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge turned, eyes burning at Vincent's lawyers. "Is this information accurate?" One attorney hesitated too long. That was answer enough. Permission was granted for a public statement in court due to unprecedented national interest. Leon walked to the stand. She didn't speak to the judge. She spoke to everyone. "There is a man in this room," she began, turning toward Luciano, "who opened his door when he had nothing. No heat, no food, no certainty he'd see another dawn. And yet, he chose kindness." She turned to the crowd. "He did not ask who we were before letting us in. He did not ask if we could repay him. He only saw the storm at our backs and opened his door." She paused. "Today, we stand in his doorway. Not because he is weak, but because he reminded us what strength truly is. Not money, not titles, not fame, but service." She lifted her hand toward the windows where sunlight reflected off hundreds of chrome tanks. "He opened his door when he had nothing. Now we stand in his doorway with everything." The courtroom erupted in applause. Outside, engines revved in unison, thundering like a heartbeat. The judge stood. "This court dismisses all claims against Mr. Pedro. Furthermore, the evidence presented will be forwarded to federal authorities for immediate investigation of Mr. Mallory." Vincent's smirk vanished as security escorted him out. Luciano turned to Leon, but before he could speak, she handed him another folder. This one was different. Inside were state approval seals, permits, expansion documents, 50 restoration centers, one in every state, funded, approved, ready. Leon's voice was soft, but unstoppable. Luciano, this is no longer a project. This is a movement, and you're going to lead it. Luciano's heart pounded. Sophia squeezed his hand. Outside, the engines roared once more, this time not as protest, but as a beginning. The lights of the grand ballroom shimmered across crystal walls, reflecting gold and amber hues over an audience of global leaders, veterans, philanthropists, and families whose lives had been changed by the Cortez Pedro Restoration Initiative. Camera flashes pulsed like distant stars. At the center of the stage, beneath a banner that read, "Hope in Motion, Restoring Lives, One Engine at a Time," stood Luciano Pedro. No longer the man who once shivered beside a dying fire. No longer a face hidden from the world. Tonight, he stood wearing a tailored suit, shoulders strong, voice steady. The hall fell silent, not out of obligation, but out of reverence. In the front row sat Sophia, now a poised teenager with her mother's eyes and her father's resolve. On her jacket was a badge, Youth Ambassador, Veteran Restoration Program. Beside her sat Leon Cortez, elegant yet fierce, her presence a steady flame. There were no rings on their fingers, no labels on their bond, but every heartbeat in the room knew. This movement was born from the night they chose to ride through the fire together. Luciano adjusted the microphone, his gaze sweeping across thousands of faces, each one a story, a miracle. "In our first year," he said, voice deep with emotion, "we rebuilt one workshop. In our fifth, we rebuilt lives in all 50 states. Today, our restoration centers employ not hundreds, but tens of thousands. Veterans who once believed they had no place in this world now mentor others. Single mothers run departments. Formerly homeless men now design engines sold across continents." Applause swelled like a rising tide. Luciano placed a hand over his heart. "But I stand here today, not as a founder, not as a leader, but as a man who was saved." The room stilled. He spoke softer, more personal. "There was a night," he said, "in the mountains of Tennessee, when I believed the world had forgotten me. My fire was dying. My daughter slept beside me, and I had no more strength to give. I thought life was ending." He paused. Eyes found Leon's. Her steady nod told him, "Continue." "But destiny didn't knock," he said, voice tightening. "It roared through the storm on 2 wheels." A murmur moved through the crowd. "That night," Luciano continued, 20 engines carried angels through the snow, women who led not with pity, but with purpose. They asked me for shelter, and gave me back my life." Sophia wiped a tear discreetly. Veterans in the audience bowed their heads. Luciano's final words echoed through the hall like a vow carved into stone. "The night I thought life was over, destiny rode through the snow and saved me. And I will spend the rest of my life doing the same for others." The crowd rose as one, an ocean of applause. But Luciano didn't look at the standing ovation. He looked at Leon. She didn't smile widely, just nodded, once. The kind of nod given by riders before a journey, a promise. Outside, the night was cold, but not empty. In the parking lot, thousands of motorcycles lined the roads, engines rumbling softly in unison. As Luciano, Leon, and Sophia stepped outside, the riders turned on their headlights one by one, their beams slicing through the darkness until the entire horizon glowed. The engines revved, not as noise, but as heartbeat, as hope, as a reminder. That sometimes the angels we pray for don't descend from the sky. They arrive on engines. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, like, share for more.